Traditional advice about dealing with toxic people will destroy you. Set boundaries, they say. Walk away with grace. Be the bigger person. But Carl Jung discovered something far more powerful and far more dangerous. The kindest people, the empaths, are either destroyed by what they see, or they transform into something extraordinary. And Jung warned about the psychological defense mechanism that toxic people use most: shadow projection. Here's what most people don't understand about toxic relationships. You're not fighting their conscious intentions. You're fighting their unconscious projections, and that changes everything. These individuals have spent their entire lives being what Jung called emotional shock absorbers of their social systems. They absorbed pain, ignored warning signs, blamed themselves, and apologized for existing. But when their suppressed strength, their shadow, finally gets activated by extreme betrayal, something terrifying happens. They snap. And Jung documented exactly what happens next. The problem starts with something Jung called differentiated perception. These individuals see what others miss. They read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, detect lies instantly, and feel the unconscious tensions in every room. They perceive psychological patterns that escape everyone else. Jung documented patients who could walk into any room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying? Who was in emotional pain? Who harbored secret resentments? This wasn't psychosis or delusion. This was consciousness so advanced it had become socially dangerous. Jung wrote that the patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. She couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social facade. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her. She couldn't hold employment because her presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that keep groups functioning. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for social survival. These individuals see the depression behind forced smiles. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. This advanced consciousness is dangerous because it creates isolation. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. And that's when toxic people begin their attack. Because people with highly differentiated perception see others' unconscious contents clearly, they become targets for what Jung extensively documented as shadow projection. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problems they're merely observing. When these highly perceptive individuals would gently suggest that someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. Jung realized this wasn't coincidence, it was psychological defense. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected. This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. The bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This pattern explains why these individuals don't just feel misunderstood. They feel systematically targeted by a force they can't rationally explain. The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. But here's what makes toxic people truly dangerous. When someone projects their shadow with conviction, their brain literally rewrites reality to support their distorted perceptions. During intense projection episodes, the same neural networks activate as during delusional states. The person isn't consciously lying. Their brain has actually altered their perception of reality. This explains why shadow projectors are so convincing to others. They genuinely believe their distorted perceptions because their neural filtering system has been hijacked by unconscious content. The projector's conviction creates what psychologists call reality distortion fields. They don't just see you incorrectly, they convince others to see you through their distorted lens. Jung documented case after case where shadow projectors destroyed reputations, relationships, and entire social networks simply by spreading their unconscious projections with absolute certainty. Think about the last time someone accused you of motivations you never had, emotions you never felt, or intentions you never possessed. If they did it with complete certainty, immune to any evidence you provided, you were experiencing shadow projection in real time. Here's what makes shadow projection so insidious. The stronger the projection, the more convinced the projector becomes. It's a psychological feedback loop that can trap entire families, workplaces, and communities. The warning sign appears when you notice a complete disconnection between how someone describes you and your actual internal experience. They attribute thoughts, feelings, and motivations to you that exist nowhere in your consciousness, and they do it with such certainty that you start questioning your own reality. This is psychological gaslighting at its most sophisticated level. Not conscious manipulation, but unconscious reality distortion that can drive targets to genuine psychological breakdown. Jung identified 5 unmistakable warning signs that reveal dangerous shadow projection. First, absolute certainty about others' motivations. They don't say, "I think you might be." They say you are, with complete conviction about your internal states, motivations, and character. Second, immunity to contradictory evidence. No amount of explanation, clarification, or contrary evidence can shake their perceptions. They interpret your attempts to correct their misperceptions as further proof of their accuracy. Third, emotional intensity disproportionate to evidence. They have strong emotional reactions to perceived slights or behaviors that others find minor or non-existent. Their emotional intensity reveals the projected content, not your actual behavior. Fourth, consistent victim narratives. They consistently end up in conflicts where they're the innocent victim of others' malice, manipulation, or cruelty. The cast of characters changes, but they're always the wronged party. Fifth, recruitment behavior. They subtly or overtly try to get others to see you the way they do, often through seemingly concerned conversations about your character or behavior. When you see these 5 signs together, you're not dealing with simple misunderstanding or personality conflict. You're facing unconscious shadow projection that will escalate until it destroys something: your reputation, your relationships, or your sanity. The real danger is how shadow projectors unconsciously recruit others into their distorted reality. Jung called this collective possession, when entire groups begin seeing the world through one person's projections. When someone presents their projections with absolute conviction, others experience psychological pressure to align their perceptions with the projector's certainty rather than trust their own contradictory observations. This is how families turn against scapegoated members, how workplaces mob innocent employees, how communities destroy individuals based on projected accusations that have no basis in reality. The projector becomes the center of a psychological storm, unconsciously organizing others into attacking the very qualities they cannot accept in themselves. But there's another dangerous personality type Jung identified: individuals experiencing ego inflation. While shadow projectors are unconsciously dangerous, inflated individuals are consciously convinced of their own righteousness, while being completely blind to their shadow. The inflated person doesn't just project their shadow. They identify with archetypal energies that far exceed their personal capacity for integration. They become possessed by the savior, the wise one, the truth bearer, or the righteous judge. Unlike obvious narcissists who are easily spotted, inflated individuals often appear spiritually evolved, morally superior, or intellectually enlightened. This apparent elevation makes them infinitely more dangerous because people willingly submit to their authority. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation in his work on analytical psychology. The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. The warning signs of dangerous inflation include never doubting their own motivations. While authentic spiritual teachers express humility before mystery, inflated individuals exhibit absolute certainty about their perceptions and judgments. They interpret disagreement as evil. They don't process questioning as useful information, but as resistance to truth, goodness, or divine will itself. They display extraordinary charisma, combined with rigid thinking. Their conviction creates magnetic attraction, while their inflated state eliminates psychological flexibility. Highly perceptive individuals often fall into what Jung called the prophet complex, believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. This leads to preaching, judgment, and eventual isolation. Jung observed that the moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. Jung warned that inflated individuals eventually collapse under the psychic tension of identifying their small ego with transpersonal contents. But before they collapse, they often cause devastating damage to others through their absolute conviction in their own righteousness. The third dangerous sign Jung identified is complete identification with the social persona, the mask we wear in public becoming the only identity the person recognizes. This creates what Jung called the perfect person problem. Someone so adapted to social expectations that they've lost all connection to their authentic self and shadow. The danger isn't obvious because persona-identified individuals are often models of social appropriateness. They always know what to say, how to act, what expressions to wear. But this perfection conceals a terrifying emptiness. When someone has invested all their psychic energy in maintaining a flawless external image, their rejected shadow aspects don't disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, like psychological pressure in a sealed container. The warning signs include uncanny social perfection. They never seem to have bad days, inappropriate reactions, or human inconsistencies, an artificial quality to interactions. Despite technical correctness, something feels hollow or performed in their presence. Extreme reactions to perceived image threats. Any challenge to their perfect persona triggers disproportionate defensive responses. Jung documented how persona-identified individuals often experience sudden shadow eruptions, explosive episodes where all their repressed content emerges in destructive ways. The more perfect the persona, the more chaotic and dangerous the eventual shadow explosion. These are the people who seem to have it all together until one day they don't. And when they break catastrophically, taking everyone around them down with them. So how do you respect yourself in front of these toxic people? Jung's answer is radical. You don't fight them on their terms. You integrate your own shadow first. The empath's transformation doesn't happen gradually. It happens in one explosive moment Jung called shadow integration under extreme duress. The trigger is always betrayal, not just any betrayal, but betrayal by someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. What made it devastating wasn't the act itself. It was the realization that they had seen the signs all along and ignored them. These individuals did what empaths do. They said nothing. They absorbed the pain in silence. They blamed themselves. They tried harder to be perfect partners, children, or friends. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jung called it the clarity event, when the empath's pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people. Most people would expect empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart. Their abusers expected that too. They were prepared for emotional chaos. What happened instead was something that terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung described it as the moment the victim realizes they've been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. These empaths didn't attack. They didn't rage. They simply began to speak truth. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured, not with cruelty, with clinical precision, like surgeons identifying each diseased organ before removing it. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity. These empaths were finally using their gift of complete perception, not to excuse behavior, but to expose it. Hell hath no fury like an empath who has finally learned to trust their own perceptions. The empath doesn't lose their mind from feeling too much. They lose their mind from being told their feelings are wrong. Jung realized this pattern across his cases wasn't revenge. This was what he termed shadow integration. The moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath's shadow wasn't evil. It was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. When they finally integrated these aspects of themselves, they became what Jung called psychologically complete. Here's what made these cases so disturbing for Jung. The transformation was permanent. These patients didn't cycle back into people-pleasing. They didn't apologize for their newfound boundaries. They didn't second-guess their perceptions anymore. They had become what Jung feared most, empaths who could no longer be manipulated. These individuals had become extraordinarily successful. Their businesses thrived because they could read clients' real needs before they voiced them. Their new relationships were healthy because they could identify emotional predators within minutes. Their decisions were flawless because they trusted their intuitive intelligence completely. Jung realized something that made his blood run cold. These empaths hadn't become less empathetic. They had become perfectly empathetic, which meant they were also perfectly strategic. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They understood human psychology at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. They became what Jung privately called psychological architects, people who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with supernatural precision. Here's what truly terrified Jung. These transformed empaths chose not to use this power destructively. They could have destroyed every person who had ever hurt them. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. Jung realized he had witnessed the birth of what he called the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. These individuals have become what every manipulator fears most, someone who can see through them completely, but no longer needs anything from them. The most disturbing part for Jung was how these transformed empaths' presence affected others. People who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous around them. They couldn't explain why. These empaths weren't aggressive or cruel, but everyone sensed something had fundamentally changed. Jung identified what he called the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics won't work. They avoid integrated empaths like vampires avoid sunlight. The awakened empath doesn't need to announce their power. Others can feel it in their bones. These empath transformations didn't happen in isolation. Jung documented how their changes affected every system they had been part of. Family dynamics collapsed, not because these individuals destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. Alcoholic family members were forced to face their addictions without empaths as emotional dumping grounds. Depressed relatives had to find other sources of validation. Manipulative siblings could no longer use these transformed empaths as psychological punching bags. Here's what made Jung realize how powerful awakened empaths truly are. Their transformation forced everyone around them to evolve or reveal their true nature. The healthy people in their lives grew stronger from their example. The toxic people exposed themselves through desperate attempts to pull these empaths back into old patterns. Jung observed something he called the empath's mirror effect. These transformed individuals didn't have to actively confront people's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues back with uncomfortable clarity. Manipulators couldn't stand to be around them. They felt exposed, seen through, unable to operate their usual psychological games. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe with these empaths for the first time. The awakened empath becomes a living lie detector, not through judgment, but through presence. So what's Jung's protection protocol for dealing with toxic people before you reach your breaking point? It's deceptively simple. Conscious awareness combined with immediate boundary enforcement. Step 1. Trust your gut. If someone's perception of you consistently contradicts your internal experience, trust your internal reality over their projections. Your perceptive abilities aren't a curse. They're a sophisticated data processing system that took years to develop. Honor that intelligence. Step 2. Don't try to convince them. Shadow projectors, inflated individuals, and possessed people are immune to contradictory evidence. Attempting to convince them often strengthens their projections. When you defend yourself, you validate their distorted narrative by engaging with it. The moment you defend yourself, you've already lost the power game. Jung realized that projectors don't just misperceive reality. They create alternate realities that feel completely real to them and increasingly real to others. Step 3. Limit information. Don't share personal details that can be twisted into evidence supporting their projections. Every piece of information you give becomes ammunition in their unconscious war against their own shadow. The less they know about your internal world, the less material they have to project onto. Keep your authentic self protected from those who cannot honor it. Step 4. Document interactions. Keep records of conversations and events. Projectors often rewrite history to support their distorted narratives. When reality itself becomes contested, documentation is your anchor to truth. This isn't paranoia. It's psychological self-defense against people whose brains literally alter their memories to match their projections. Step 5. Seek outside perspective. Talk to trusted others who know both you and the projector. Reality check your perceptions with people outside the projection field. When you're being gaslit by someone's unconscious projections, outside perspectives help you maintain contact with objective reality. Choose people who have demonstrated psychological mindedness, interest in inner reality, and the ability to acknowledge their own contradictions without shame. Step 6. Withdraw when necessary. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play. If someone shows multiple dangerous signs, strategic withdrawal may be your only protection. Jung emphasized that true individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. But the hermit who withdraws from toxic projection isn't escaping life. They're protecting their psychological integrity so they can engage with life authentically. Jung's most crucial insight was this: the process of maintaining self-respect in front of toxic people isn't about fighting them. It's about individuation. conscious discrimination, telling the difference between your own psychological content and what you've absorbed from others. The key is solitude. Regular time alone, allowing absorbed material to settle so you can recognize your own authentic psychological voice. The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. Then comes shadow integration, acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. The more you deny your own darkness, the more disturbed you are by seeing it in others. This is the paradox. The only way to protect yourself from toxic people's projections is to integrate your own shadow first. Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. Finally, conscious participation. Using the protection protocol for dealing with projectors. Trust your gut over their projections. Don't try to convince them. They are immune to evidence. Limit information and document interactions. Withdraw when necessary. The only winning move is not to play. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's about becoming what Jung called selectively empathetic. Still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flows. The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. The awakened empath is now love with boundaries, someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves absolutely. Their transformation forces everyone around them to evolve or reveal their true nature. Manipulators avoid them like vampires avoid sunlight. Their mere presence is a living lie detector. The question is not whether the empath will snap, but whether they will direct that power, or will it direct them? Self-respect in front of toxic people isn't about fighting them. It's about integration. The danger is in failing to use your superior perception wisely. They didn't become different people. They became who they always were beneath the conditioning. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his. The danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. Your sensitivity isn't your weakness, it's your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful. Not dangerous to innocent people, dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. That's exactly what the world needs more of. Empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light for anyone's comfort. The world doesn't need more broken empaths. It needs more awakened ones. And Jung's research proves that transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable. The empath will snap. The only question is, will you direct that power, or will it direct you? Choose conscious transformation. Because the most beautiful part of Jung's findings is this: these transformed empaths never lost their capacity for love. They just learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole. The awakened empath represents exactly this achievement. Not someone who has become hard or cynical, but someone who has learned to hold their perceptions lightly, seeing clearly without attachment to others, accepting what they see, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally, without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Share in the comments which type of differentiated perceiver you are. Your individuation journey connects with others walking the same path. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends collective unconscious limitations. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.